The FIFA World Cup is the biggest sports event in the world. Over 5 billion people tuned in to the 2022 edition in Qatar. And with all those eyeballs comes a lot of money, power, and controversy. The 2026 World Cup will be the largest in history, hosted across 16 cities in the US, Canada, and Mexico. And FIFA is budgeting a record $13 billion in revenue. For fans, that also means it's going to be the most expensive World Cup ever. $11,000 tickets, $150 train rides, and $15,000 bonds for visas for some fans. So I had a few questions. What actually is FIFA and how do they make money? Why is this World Cup so expensive? And is hosting a World Cup even a good deal? My name is Saurav Rizwood and this is Playbook. I tell the stories of business and sport icons. Let's get into it. To understand FIFA, we have to rewind to the early 20th century. Football was growing more and more popular, and a few countries were starting to play each other competitively. So in 1904, a group of officials met in Paris to form the International Federation of Association Football, or FIFA, to oversee the sport. Then in 1930, football was kicked out of the Olympics. So FIFA just decided to host their own tournament, the World Cup. The first edition was hosted in Uruguay, which had won the last 2 Olympic golds, and had just 13 teams. And Uruguay won, beating Argentina 4-2 in front of 68,000 home fans. Over the next few decades, the World Cup cycled between Europe and South America, and it was decently popular. But it was never truly a global sport. That all changed with the rise of television. Suddenly, people could tune in from all over the world and support their home country. And viewership exploded to 600 million people for the 1966 World Cup. And over time, FIFA expanded into a quasi-political group. Today, it has 211 member nations across 6 federations. And it's also become a financial powerhouse. Take a look at this graph. It shows FIFA's revenue over the last 2 decades. You can see that they operate in 4-year cycles, with World Cups bringing in over 80% of revenue in each cycle. And the recent growth has been insane. Revenue breaks down into 4 sources: broadcasting, tickets and hospitality, marketing, and licensing and other. Let's take a closer look at each of these. Broadcasting is the big moneymaker, accounting for 1/3 of the pie. Very simply, TV companies pay FIFA for the right to show their matches on their channels. So why do broadcasters pay this much? Well, in the age of TikTok, Twitch, and Netflix, sport is about the only thing left that people still tune into live. Now, compared to the last cycle, FIFA's grown this bucket by over 25%. But that's actually less than they would have liked. They've struggled to lock in broadcast deals for India and China for this World Cup, the 2 most populous countries in the world, because 1, they didn't qualify, and 2, the time zones are really odd. The next bucket is tickets and hospitality. And this is where FIFA is cashing in this year, with a 220% increase in revenue compared to the last cycle. Now, part of that is just volume. This is going to be the biggest World Cup ever. 48 teams instead of 32, 104 matches instead of 64, all played in gigantic NFL stadiums. Over 7 million tickets have been sold. But the price side is where it gets a bit more spicy. For the first time, FIFA introduced dynamic pricing, meaning ticket prices rise and fall with demand, just like airline tickets. When tickets for the final first went on sale, the most expensive ticket was listed for $6,370. After the draw in December, that jumped to $8,680. And by April, that same ticket cost $10,990. That's 7 times the most expensive ticket for the Qatar final. And it's not just the final. For the US's opening game against Paraguay in the group stage, the cheapest tickets initially offered were over $1,000. FIFA President Gianni Infantino doesn't have a problem with this. He says it simply reflects demand, the equivalent of 1,000 World Cups in his words. But at what point does the people's game stop being for the people? The second big change is that FIFA is allowing ticket reselling, but only through its own platform. And of course, the US doesn't have any laws around this, meaning that resellers can charge whatever they want. Resold tickets for the final are going for $2 million. And one ticket for a group match between Scotland and Brazil was listed for $11 million. And of course, FIFA has no incentive to change this, because they take a 15% cut from both the buyer and the seller. Wild. The third bucket is marketing. Having your logo displayed at the World Cup is enormously valuable, and FIFA is shrewd about how it sells access. They run a 3-tier system. At the top, you have long-term FIFA partners like Adidas, Coca-Cola, and Aramco. These companies pay north of $100 million every 4 years to be associated with FIFA. Then you have World Cup specific sponsors. This year, American brands like Verizon and Bank of America are flooding in to advertise to their locals. And then you have multiple smaller regional partners like Valvoline, Airbnb, and Home Depot. And FIFA has very strict rules around exclusivity. Stadiums that have name sponsors have to cover up all their usual signs. For example, MetLife Stadium, where the final is going to be held, is going to be called New York, New Jersey Stadium for the course of the tournament. All in all, it's going to be a record cycle for sponsorship, with a 60% increase from last time. Let's take a look at that final piece. Licensing revenue comes from selling FIFA's naming rights for things like toys, merch, and up until very recently, video games. Rest in peace, FIFA. But in this cycle, the big addition to the other bucket was the Club World Cup. In July 2025, 32 of the biggest clubs on the planet came to play a month-long tournament in the US, generating an unprecedented $2 billion for FIFA. So all that is how FIFA is expecting to make $13 billion. But where does all this money go? Well, it might surprise you to know that FIFA is technically a not-for-profit. It simply covers its costs and then reinvests revenue back into developing the game. So that $13 billion of revenue, they say they're going to reinvest $12.9 billion of it. This is how that breaks down. 60% or $7.6 billion is the operational cost of running these huge events. And a big chunk of this is prize money. The total prize pool for this World Cup is nearly $900 million. Each team is guaranteed a minimum of $12.5 million, with further payments then tied to performance. The champions are going to take home $50 million. Then 30% or $3.9 billion is spent on development and education. This is FIFA redistributing money back to its member nations, and what Infantino will point to when people accuse FIFA of price gouging. Each member nation gets $5 million, and each federation gets $60 million to invest in grassroots football and training facilities. The remaining 10% covers FIFA's staff costs, the cost of running judicial bodies like the Ethics Committee, and advertising and marketing costs. But what makes this non-profit status a little hard to swallow is FIFA's history of blatant corruption. FIFA might be made up of over 200 countries, but since the 60s, all the power has been concentrated in just 24 senior officials called the Executive Committee, or the EXCO. And these guys have had no issues lining their own pockets with all sorts of dodginess that went all the way up to the top. Former President João Havelange has been found guilty of accepting millions of dollars of bribes. And his successor, Sepp Blatter, conveniently overlooked kickbacks and bribery of EXCO members to keep himself in power for over 17 years. The EXCO also controlled hosting decisions. You needed to win just 13 out of the 24 votes to host the World Cup. And over time, this became a highly political and expensive process. Things started to come to light with the 2006 World Cup. Germany won by a single vote, and it later emerged that they'd paid 4 EXCO members over 6.7 million euros for their votes. The same thing happened in South Africa in 2010. The CONCACAF president, Jack Warner, received over $10 million from South African officials for his vote. But it was the next 2 bids that would taint the legacy of the World Cup forever. England were the favourites to host the 2018 World Cup, and Australia and the US were frontrunners for 2022. So it was a massive shock when Russia and Qatar won the bids instead. Investigations and allegations started flying immediately. EXCO member Rafael Salguero admitted to getting $1 million for his vote for Russia. And Jack Warner again got $5 million for his. For Qatar, the Sunday Times uncovered evidence that Mohammed bin Hammam, Qatar's man on the EXCO, had paid over $5 million to officials across Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia for their votes. disguised as football development funds. Now, no one's actually been convicted for corruption in relation to the Russia and Qatar bids. But since then, over half of the ExCo members that voted have either been indicted or banned by FIFA. The vote itself was never annulled. Russia hosted in 2018 and Qatar did in 2022. But since then, FIFA has at least tried to clean up its act. Sepp Blatter resigned in disgrace in 2015 and was replaced by Gianni Infantino. And in 2016, voting power was taken away from the ExCo and given back to the entire FIFA Congress. Amid all this controversy, Infantino must have been delighted to finally host a World Cup in a country not involved in wars or human rights issues. Yeah. So are the US, Canada, and Mexico actually happy to host this World Cup? It's not an easy answer. Supporters will cite 3 benefits of hosting a World Cup: a GDP boost from tourism, improved infrastructure, and increased global visibility. But each of these is complicated. For the tourism benefit, the argument sounds intuitive. Millions of people come to visit and stay in hotels and spend in local businesses. But it's not that simple. The first issue is the substitution effect. Basically, sports tourists come and displace other tourists. An English football fan who spent thousands of dollars on flights and match tickets probably isn't going to go to Broadway as well. And a recent survey found that over 80% of hotels in host cities have bookings tracking below forecasts. And while the benefits are so-so, the costs are very concrete. In New Jersey, train tickets to MetLife Stadium were initially hiked from $13 to $150, even for regular commuters. The New Jersey governor has also announced a 3% hike in the sales tax during the World Cup, which will impact every New Jersey resident who lives within a 30-mile radius of MetLife Stadium. And security also costs a lot. In July last year, Congress promised $625 million to host cities for security. But the recent government shutdowns have meant that a lot of this funding was delayed, and cities have had to scale back their fan festivals because of this. And in March 2026, the town of Foxborough, Massachusetts, which is hosting 7 games at the Gillette Stadium, the Boston Soccer Stadium, threatened to pull out entirely if they didn't get $7.8 million for security costs. Eventually, the Kraft Group, who owns the New England Patriots, stepped in and decided to cover the costs. And FIFA's position amongst all this is not our problem. They hand off the responsibility to local host committees, usually made up of local governments and business leaders. And they tell these committees to raise their own money from corporate sponsors. But then they also restrict who can be sponsors because they don't want to clash with their overall sponsorship pyramid. The result? Most cities have barely signed any sponsors, and taxpayers are covering the gap. So yeah, the GDP argument is flimsy. But the infrastructure angle is even more limited this time. It made sense in Qatar, who spent a mind-boggling $200 billion building new stadiums and a metro line for the World Cup. For this World Cup, all the stadiums already exist. And if anything, the tournament is going to be a net strain on infrastructure. FIFA's demanding extra-large security cordons around each stadium, reducing parking and putting a lot more strain on public transit. And the TSA has been drafted in for stadium security, which means airports in host cities are going to be stretched thin during peak travel season. Lastly, there's the global visibility or soft power angle. Again, this matters a lot more for up-and-coming countries like Qatar, who want to promote tourism and foreign investment. But for this year's hosts, the calculus is different. New York, LA, Miami, these are cities that don't need a World Cup to put them on the map. And for the US, the tournament is coming at a time when its global reputation is at a historic low, meaning any issues will be amplified rather than forgiven. So as the World Cup gets closer, the cities that pulled out, like Montreal and Chicago, are starting to look like the smarter ones. So is hosting a World Cup a good deal? For FIFA, the answer is absolutely. They might be a non-profit, but make no mistake, this is a commercial machine. They'll walk away with over $13 billion in revenue, having spent almost nothing on stadiums, security, or infrastructure. For the host cities, the jury is still very much out. What FIFA and the local organisers will be hoping is that once the action kicks off on field, all the off-field drama will be forgotten. And honestly, they're probably right. That's the thing about the World Cup. It's probably the only event in the world that can bring 5 billion people together. And as long as that's true, FIFA can do whatever they want and charge whatever they want. Whether or not that's a good thing for football, I'll let you decide. Thanks for watching episode 4 of Playbook. It would mean the world if you could like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps grow the channel. Let me know what business or sports story you want to hear about next.